The four men stepped out of the trees, and Hiroshi understood, with the sudden coldness of a man who has miscalculated everything, that there was no version of this road in which they were going to let him pass. The lead man was the largest. He stood in the middle of the path with his thumb hooked into his belt, and he was smiling the small, slow smile of a man who has done this before, on this same stretch of road to travelers, and has not yet been disappointed. The other three were behind him. They were not smiling. Hiroshi was alone. He had a short blade at his hip. He had a small satchel of coins he had carried from his uncle's house, 3 days east. He had been told the road through these hills was safe in the daytime, and he had believed it because he had wanted to. He stopped on the path. The lead man took a slow step forward. Here is the thing no man wants to admit while his hands are trembling. When you cannot stay calm in front of another man, you have already lost the fight before any blade has moved. The man on the other side does not need to be stronger. He does not need to be faster. He only needs to be the one whose breath did not change, because every confrontation in your life will be decided by which of the two of you arrives in his body first, and which of you is still scrambling behind his face to find himself. The men in the road, Hiroshi's breath had changed. He could feel it. The shallow climb of it, the slight catch at the top. He could feel his own hand wanting to move toward the hilt of the blade, and he could feel, just behind it, the small private knowledge that if he reached, the four men would come, and that they had been waiting for the last several seconds for exactly that movement. The lead man saw the breath. That was the worst part. Hiroshi watched him see it. He watched the small flicker of satisfaction pass through the man's face. The recognition of a traveler whose body had already begun the fight without his permission. The lead man took another step forward, slower this time, the slow walk of a man who has been told the door is unlocked. It was at this moment, in the small space before the man closed the distance, that another figure came around the bend in the road behind the four men. A traveler. He was older. He carried a wooden staff. He had a short blade at his hip, and what looked like a longer wooden one strapped across his back. His robe was patched. His face was the face of a man who had walked a long way that day and was not yet finished walking. He did not stop when he saw the four men. He did not slow. He simply continued at the same pace he had been walking, and the four men, who had been entirely focused on Hiroshi, did not notice him for a long moment. The traveler walked past them without looking at any of them. He passed the lead man at the distance of a single arm's length, neither closer nor further, and he did not turn his head, and he did not break his stride. Hiroshi watched him do this and understood, without yet having the words for it, that he had just seen a kind of courage he had not known existed. The lead man's eyes shifted to the traveler. Only his eyes, not his head, not his shoulders. Something in the Traswalkod told him, in the small reptilian part of his attention, that the man passing him was not the kind of man he wanted to look at directly. The traveler kept walking. He did not stop near Hiroshi. He did not nod to him. He passed Hiroshi at the same arm's length and the same unbroken pace, and he disappeared around the next bend in the road, and the sound of his staff on the gravel grew faint and then was gone. The four men were quiet. The lead man's smile had not entirely returned. Hiroshi understood in the silence that the road had changed. The traveler had not spoken. He had not raised a hand. He had not so much as looked at any of the five men he had walked between. And yet the air on the path felt different now, as if a stone had been dropped in a pond and the ripples were still moving, and the four men had not quite decided whether to step back into them. Hiroshi did not know the traveler's name. He would learn it later that night, from an old farmer who would refuse at first to repeat it and who would say, when finally pressed, only that there was one traveler on these roads whose passing changed the temperature of the air, and that bandits had stopped working a particular bend in the path 2 summers ago because of him. The bend the farmer would describe was the bend Hiroshi was standing in now. But Hiroshi did not know any of that yet. He only knew that the lead man had not moved for several seconds, and that whatever he did in the next breath would decide the rest of his life. The breath that did not belong to him, Hiroshi, did not reach for the blade. He did not know, until that moment, that this was a decision he was capable of making. His hand had been moving toward the hilt the way water moves down a slope, without permission, without thought. Then, in the small empty space the traveler had left on the road, his hand stopped. It did not stop because he was brave. It stopped because, for one long second, he was watching himself the way he had just watched the older man. The traveler had walked past 4 armed men without changing his breath. Hiroshi had been standing still, and his breath had already lost itself. He understood in that 1 second that the 4 men had not been winning the fight on the road. His own body had been winning it for them. He let his hand fall slowly to his side. The lead man saw this too. He saw the hand stop. He saw it lower. He saw, and this was the thing that mattered, that the lowering had not been the lowering of a man giving up. It had been the lowering of a man who had just remembered something. The lead man had seen enough men on enough roads to recognize the small shift in a traveler's eyes that meant the traveler had stopped being prey. He took half a step back. The other 3 behind him did not notice. The lead man noticed it in himself, and Hiroshi noticed it in the lead man, and the road, which a moment before had been entirely the lead man's, became, very slightly, no man's road at all. Hiroshi did not speak. He had learned something watching the traveler, though he could not yet have said what, and he understood that whatever it was not a thing that survived being put into words. The strength of what the older man had carried past them had been the strength of a man whose attention was already elsewhere, on a road further on, in a life larger than the 4 men in front of him. The lead man had been counting on Hiroshi's attention. He had needed it. The entire fight had been built on Hiroshi giving him every part of himself. His breath, his eyes, his hand on the hilt, his whole imagined future condensed into the small space between 4 men and a satchel of coins. The moment Hiroshi's attention had drifted in the wake of the traveler's passing, the food had been taken away. He took another half step back. He covered it with a small movement of his shoulders. The men behind him still did not see. Hiroshi began to walk. He did not announce it. He did not raise his hands. He did not make the small, placating gestures of a man trying to negotiate his way past danger. He simply began to walk, the way the traveler had walked, at the same steady pace. And he walked past the lead man at the distance of a single arm's length, and he did not turn his head. His breath was not yet the traveler's breath. He could feel the small, tight catch at the top of it, the part of him still waiting for the blade between his shoulders. He did not pretend the catch was not there. He simply did not feed it. He walked past the second man, and the third, and the fourth, and he did not breathe normally until he was around the next bend. When he was sure he was alone, he stopped. He sat down at the edge of the path on a flat stone. His legs were shaking. The catch in his breath came loose, and for a long minute he could not control it. And he leaned forward with his hands on his knees and let it run through him the way a flood runs through an empty house. He understood sitting there that what he had just done was not courage. Courage was the wrong word. Courage was what he had thought he would need on this road. A thing he would have to summon. A thing he would have to push past his fear. The traveler had not summoned anything. The traveler had simply not been available to be afraid. The fear had been on the road. The traveler had not been on the road in the same way Hiroshi had been on the road. He had been somewhere else, inside himself, and his body had walked the path his attention had already left. This was the thing Hiroshi did not yet have. He could see the shape of it. He could not yet do it. He had only imitated it for the length of one bend in a road, and his legs were shaking, and his breath was still catching, and he was a long way from being a man whose passage changed the temperature of the air. But he had walked, and on the stone he understood that the traveler had not given him anything. The traveler had only walked his own road, and Hiroshi had been on it. And that was the entire teaching. He stood up. He did not yet know that the old farmer was waiting half a day ahead, with a pot of tea and a name he would not want to speak. The name the farmer would not say. The farmhouse was small and the door was open. Hiroshi had not planned to stop. He had been walking since the stone, and his legs had been telling him for some time that they had walked far enough. He had told himself he would walk past. He did not walk past. The old farmer was sitting on the step. He looked up when Hiroshi appeared at the edge of the yard. He did not seem surprised. He did not seem welcoming either. He looked at Hiroshi the way a man looks at a stray dog that has wandered close to his fire. Without hostility, but without any particular intention to feed it. You came from the East Road. Yes, you met men there." Hiroshi did not answer. The farmer was looking at his hands, which were still slightly shaking. He gestured to the step beside him. Hiroshi sat down. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The farmer was drinking tea from a clay cup. After a while, he stood, went inside, and came back with a second cup. He poured. He set the cup beside Hiroshi. He sat down again. Hiroshi drank. "There was another man," he said, "on the road." He walked past them. They did not touch him. The farmer nodded slowly. "They never do. You know him. I know of him. What is his name?" The farmer did not answer. He drank his tea. He looked at the fields. He did not refuse the question with his face. He did not seem unwilling, exactly, but he did not speak. And Hiroshi understood, after a moment, that the silence was not refusal. The silence was the old man trying to decide whether saying the name would help Hiroshi or harm him. "I have been on this road 40 years. There have been many men on it. Most of them you would not remember a week after you pass them. There is one I will remember on the day I die." He paused. "He passed through my yard once, 11 years ago. He drank from my well. He did not speak. He sat for an hour under that tree," the farmer pointed. "For a year afterward, I could not sit under that tree without remembering how he had sat under it. It was not that he was still. Other men are still. It was that he was finished with something. Most men sit with their fight still inside them, their unfinished arguments, their resentments, their fears of what is coming tomorrow. They carry these into their sitting, and the sitting becomes a small, thin thing wrapped around all the unfinished business. He sat the way a man sits when there is no unfinished business in him. None. He took a slow drink. I asked him a question once, in the hour he was here. I have not told anyone what I asked. He answered me with one sentence. It was not the sentence I expected. It was not even at first the sentence I wanted. I thought about it for a long time afterward. It is the sentence I have been living by in a small way for 11 years. He looked at Hiroshi. He said, "Do not be afraid of the man across from you. Be afraid of the man inside you who is afraid of him." Hiroshi sat very still. That was all. He drank from the well. He sat under the tree. He left. I did not ask him his name. I had not yet earned the asking. I learned it later, in a village 2 days from here, from a man who had once watched him fight 3 brothers on a riverbank and walk away without his robe being marked. The farmer turned his cup, slowly in his hands. There are men in this country who are afraid of his name, men who have never met him, men who will never meet him. The name has been on the wind in these provinces for 30 years, and it does not need to land on a particular man to do its work. The 4 men you saw on the road today, they did not know whose passing they had just been spared by. They felt the shadow of it on the back of their necks, and they did not know what it was, and it was enough. He paused. "I will say it once, then I will not say it again because I am old, and saying it costs me something, and I have only a small amount of saying left." He looked at the fields. "Miyamoto Musashi." Hiroshi felt the name settle into the wood of the step beneath him. The farmer did not look at him. He drank the last of his tea. He set the cup down. He stood slowly and walked into his house and slid the door closed behind him without another word. Hiroshi sat on the step for a long time. He drank the rest of his tea cold, and he understood, somewhere in the second hour of sitting, that the farmer had given him something he had not yet earned, and that what he did with it from here was no longer the farmer's problem, and had never been the traveler's. It had only ever been his. The bend in the road. 9 years later, 9 years passed. Hiroshi did not become the traveler. He had understood on the farmer's step that he was not going to. The traveler had walked a road for 30 years before that bend, and Hiroshi could not walk 30 years backward to begin where the traveler had begun. He walked his own road instead. It was the only road he had. He did not tell anyone what had happened on the path. He spoke of the 4 men once to no one, in the dark of his own room, and never again. The memory was not a story. It was a stone he carried at the bottom of his own chest, and the stone was the thing he was building the rest of himself around. The work was small. He noticed his breath. Not always. Often he forgot. But when he remembered, in moments when another man raised his voice, or when a merchant tried to cheat him, or when a stranger looked at him too long in a market square, he noticed the shallow climb of his own chest, and he noticed the small, tight catch at the top of it, and he did not feed it. He did not always succeed. There were years he could not have counted the times he failed. But the failures grew smaller, the catches loosened, the breath slowly began to belong to him. He noticed after the third year that men spoke to him differently. Not all men, he had not changed enough for that, but a particular kind of man. The loud kind, the kind who walked into rooms looking for someone whose face he could rearrange, had begun very slightly to pass over him. They did not pick him for the small daily fights of marketplaces and inns. They picked the men beside him. Hiroshi had not done anything. He had only stopped offering them what they needed. In the 7th year, he was on the same road again. He had not planned to be. The road had simply come up in his work. He came around the same bend, the same trees, the same flat stone where he had once sat shaking with his hands on his knees. The road was empty. The 4 men were not there. Hiroshi did not know whether they had moved on or whether they were dead. He stood for a moment in the place where they had stepped from the trees. He noticed his own breath. It was even. The catch was not there. He had walked into the place where his body had once collapsed, and his body had not collapsed. He understood, standing there, that the small daily work had done what no single act of courage could have done. The breath had not been mastered, it had been changed. The stone he had been carrying at the bottom of his chest for 9 years had become the floor of him, and the floor was steady. He walked on. He did not stop at the farmer's house. He had heard 2 years before that the old man had died. The tree under which the traveler had once sat was still standing. Hiroshi did not turn off the road to look at it. He had carried all these years the sentence the old man had spoken on the step, and the sentence had done its work. In the 9th year, on a different road, he passed a young man. The young man was standing very still in the middle of the path. His shoulders were locked. His breath was high in his chest. 2 men were standing in front of him and a third behind, and Hiroshi understood the shape of the scene before he had fully entered it. He did not stop. He did not slow. He walked at the same pace he had been walking, and he passed the 2 men in front at the distance of a single arm's length, neither closer nor further, and he did not turn his head. He passed the young man at the same arm's length. He passed the third man behind. He kept walking. He did not look back. He was not certain whether the men would let the young man pass. He understood that this was not his to decide. He had only walked a road. The young man was on it. What happened next was the young man's road, and the men's road, and the small private mathematics that would pass between them in the next several seconds was not a thing Hiroshi could wait from. The outside, he walked. Somewhere behind him he heard nothing. No shout, no drawn blade, no sound of bodies meeting. He did not turn. He walked until the bend in the road took him out of sight, and then he walked further, and then he sat on a stone at the edge of the path and drank from a small flask. His breath was even. The catch was not there. He did not know whether the young man was still standing on the road, or whether he had walked, or whether the men had moved on the way the 4 men of his own youth had moved. He only knew that whatever a man could give another man on a road he had given. The rest was not his. He stood up. He walked.